The cicadas screamed louder than the church bells that morning. Their shrill chorus rose from the swamp like a warning, a sound that didn't belong to daylight. Sweat clung to the wooden porch rail where a woman's fingers tapped in rhythm, slow, steady, like the ticking of a clock. She was smiling, but not the kind of smile you'd ever trust. Behind her, inside the plantation house, a chair scraped violently against the floor, a muffled cry, then silence. The woman didn't turn. She just kept tapping, staring out into the blinding heat, as if she were waiting for something inevitable to arrive. The scent of burnt coffee mixed with iron in the air, and anyone standing close enough would have sworn the smile on her lips widened at the smell. The house that shouldn't breathe. The house watches, the cicadas never stopped screaming. Even at night, when the swamp mist rolled in and cloaked the trees, their endless rasp filled the air like a warning no one listened to anymore. The Wilcox plantation house had stood for a century and a half, perched on rotting stilts above marshland that gurgled with frogs and snakes. The walls were painted white once, though now the boards peeled like scabs, revealing wood swollen with rain. People said the house breathed at night, that if you stood close enough you could hear it sighing through its broken shutters. On most nights the place seemed empty, except for one room on the second floor. A faint light burned there, dim and sour yellow like a lantern low on oil. That was where she sat, always smiling. Her name was Clara Bell. Clara's smile. Clara had been brought to the house years ago when the Wilcox family still had money. She came as a servant, quiet and capable, and no one in town ever spoke her name louder than a whisper. She was the kind of woman you noticed not for her beauty, but for her stillness. She could walk into a room and disappear into its edges, silent as a moth clinging to curtains. But she had a smile, a strange, slow smile that made people uneasy. It was too calm, too patient, like she was hearing a joke no one else understood. Her master, Henry Wilcox, noticed it first. He used to bark at her for grinning that way while pouring his whiskey or carrying up his supper tray. But Clara never stopped. That smile was nailed to her face, soft and constant, like a mask she'd grown into, and the longer she stayed in that house, the more Henry came to hate it. Whispers in town. The town of Redfern was small enough that gossip carried faster than the river's current. Folks whispered about the Wilcox house. They whispered about Henry's drinking, about how his wife had wasted away and died upstairs, about how Clara remained when every other servant left. Children dared each other to throw stones at the gates, but no one ever lingered long. The house had a pull, like a wound you couldn't look at for too long without feeling sick. In the general store, old men spat tobacco and muttered that Henry Wilcox had lost more than his fortune. He'd lost his mind. Some said Clara had bewitched him. Others said she was just patient, biding her time like a spider waiting for her fly to tire itself out. A night of screams one night. The town woke to screams drifting across the swamp. It wasn't unusual for Henry's temper to spill over and drink, but this sound was different. It wasn't rage. It was terror. Those who claimed they heard it said it was like the sound of a man discovering something too late. A raw, choking howl that was cut short mid-breath. But when the sheriff rode out the next morning, the house was silent. Clara answered the door with her usual smile, and Henry himself, pale and sweating, stood behind her. He claimed it was nothing more than a nightmare. The sheriff didn't believe him. But the way Clara looked at him, that quiet smile, made him step back from the threshold without another word. Henry's decline. Henry Wilcox began to rot from the inside out. He stopped leaving the house, stopped appearing in town. His once broad frame withered, his cheeks hollowed, his eyes sunk deep into shadows. People said he looked 20 years older, and still, every evening, Clara brought his supper. And every morning she stood on the porch for a while, tapping her fingers along the rail, smiling at nothing at all. Henry swore he could hear her footsteps in the walls at night, swore she was whispering in corners when no one was there, swore she was putting something in his food, though when he demanded she eat from his plate, she did so without hesitation. Always smiling, what unnerved him most wasn't the food. It was her patience. She wasn't in any hurry. The locked room, by late autumn, the air grew heavy with mildew, and the swamp smelled of decay. Henry had boarded himself into his study upstairs, keeping the curtains nailed shut. Clara never knocked. She only left the tray outside his door silent, but Henry began to notice things. The whiskey tasted wrong. The coffee smelled faintly metallic. He coughed up flecks of red into his handkerchief. One night he heard something worse than his cough. From behind the walls, faint but certain, came the sound of tapping. Slow, rhythmic, like fingers drumming a rail. He pressed his ear to the plaster. On the other side, he swore he heard Clara's smile. The letter Henry tried to write a letter to his brother in Charleston. His hands shook too much to keep the ink steady, but he managed to scrawl out a few desperate words. "She's killing me slowly. Help." But when he sealed the envelope and left it on the hall table for the post, it never reached the courier. Weeks later, Henry found the letter tucked neatly under his pillow. No words added, no explanation. Just returned to him, as if the house itself had delivered it back. Clara never mentioned it, but she smiled a little wider that morning. The first true fracture winter came, though in the south it meant little more than colder rain and fog that clung to your lungs. The swamp froze in patches and the frogs went quiet. Henry had stopped sleeping. He roamed the upstairs halls, muttering to himself, his breath sour and ragged. Clara moved like a shadow, always one step ahead of him, leaving things just where he'd stumble upon them. A cracked glass of whiskey, a chair slightly turned, his dead wife's shawl draped across a banister. The house began to feel like a stage, and Henry the actor in a play he hadn't agreed to perform. And Clara? Clara was the audience, smiling, always smiling. The night it broke on. The 22nd night of December, Henry finally snapped. He came stumbling down the stairs, a pistol clutched in one trembling hand, his eyes wild. He shouted Clara's name, his voice cracking with rage and terror. But the house was silent. Only the cicadas screamed outside, and the faint dripping of rain through the rafters. Henry's heart pounded as he searched room after room, the pistol wavering. Every time he thought he saw her shadow, it dissolved into the curtains. Every time he thought he heard her footsteps, it turned out to be his own. Finally, he flung open the dining room door and froze. There, on the long mahogany table, sat his supper tray. The meat was half eaten, the glass of whiskey drained, and at the head of the table, where he had once presided over guests and family, sat Clara, her hands folded neatly, her smile fixed, but her eyes did not blink. Henry realized with a strangled gasp that she had been sitting there all along, waiting. The poison in the walls dinner. With the dead Henry's throat closed as though the air itself had curdled. Clara sat in his chair, the head of the long mahogany table, her posture flawless, her hands folded as if she were about to offer grace before a meal. Her eyes glowed faintly in the lamplight. Not bright, not supernatural, but steady, too steady. They did not blink. The corners of her mouth curved upward, the smile that never wavered. Henry's pistol shook in his hand. His knees threatened to give way, though his pride forced him upright. "Get out of my chair," he rasped. His voice cracked like old paper. Clara didn't move. Didn't answer. Only the clock on the mantel answered him, its tick louder than the cicadas outside. The ghost smile, he fired. The sound ripped through the house, echoing against the boarded shutters, scattering a roost of blackbirds outside. The bullet tore into the chair back, splintering wood where her head should have been. But when Henry blinked, she was gone, not fled. Not fallen, gone. The chair was empty, the supper tray untouched, the meat whole, the glass full. Henry staggered back, the pistol clattering from his fingers. His heart banged in his chest so loud he thought the sound might bring the roof down. He told himself it was whiskey madness, a hallucination. But when he reached for the glass, the whiskey was warm, as though lips had touched it only moments before. And on the edge of the table, pressed into the dust, was the faint half-moon imprint of a smile. The doctor's visit word of Henry's decline had crept back into town. 3 days after the gunshot echoed across the swamp, a doctor arrived. Dr. Fielding, a thin, hawk-nosed man who carried a bag full of bitter tonics and a sharper tongue. Clara opened the door for him, smiling her patient smile, and showed him upstairs. She said nothing, only gestured toward Henry's study. The doctor found Henry trembling by the fire, eyes bloodshot, skin the color of ash. "She's poisoning me," Henry whispered before Fielding even opened his bag. "It's in the whiskey, the coffee, the food. She's slipping it in drop by drop. I can feel it burning me." Fielding studied him coolly, then the untouched tray by the bed. He lifted the glass, sniffed, and drank. The whiskey burned his throat, but it was whiskey. Nothing more. Clara's smile deepened as she stood in the doorway. Town doubts. The doctor returned to Redfern that evening with a simple conclusion. Henry Wilcox had drunk himself near to death. Nothing more sinister, but the sheriff wasn't convinced. He'd seen the pale twitch in Henry's hands, the gaunt panic in his eyes. He'd seen the way Clara hovered silently behind, always smiling, never speaking. Still, the law had limits. Unless Henry himself left the house to press charges, Clara could not be touched. And Henry, trapped in the web of his own fear, had no strength to leave. The town grew uneasy. The house grew quieter, and Clara's smile remained. Henry's paranoia nights blurred together. Henry stopped sleeping, his dreams worse than waking. Sometimes he heard laughter through the walls, a soft woman's laugh that seemed to echo from every corner of the house. Other times he heard whispering beneath the floorboards, his name murmured over and over in Clara's voice. He began scratching at the plaster, convinced she was hiding passages behind the walls. He tore open whole sections of his study, splintering wood, ripping paper from insulation, but when the boards fell away, there was nothing except the faint smell of iron, sharp and metallic, that made his stomach twist. Clara's patience, Clara, never protested the damage, never questioned his rants. Every morning, she tapped her fingers along the porch rail, smiling at the swamp mist, as though she were counting down time only she understood. When Henry demanded she eat first from every plate she served, she obeyed. When he ordered her to drink the whiskey, she swallowed it without hesitation. But Henry swore he could still taste something different. Something slow. Something she slipped in when his back was turned. He imagined her spooning poison into his life like sugar into tea, smiling as she stirred. The brothers' arrival, one evening, the sound of hooves cut through the swamp fog. Henry's brother, James Wilcox, had arrived from Charleston. Stronger, younger, with a skeptical face and a soldier's bearing, James stormed through the door demanding answers. "Henry, you look half dead," James growled, clapping him on the shoulder. "And what's this nonsense about a servant girl tormenting you?" Henry tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. He turned, gesturing wildly at Clara, who stood behind them carrying the supper tray. James looked at her, looked at the smile, looked at the way she set the tray down without a word. He laughed. "My God, Henry, you've gone soft in the head. That girl couldn't harm a fly." Clara's smile widened, just slightly, just enough. A brother's doubt that night. James stayed awake long after Henry collapsed into feverish sleep. He paced the halls, restless. Something about Clara gnawed at him. The silence, the stillness, the unchanging smile. He checked the tray in the kitchen, sniffed the whiskey, tasted the stew. It was fine. Bitter perhaps, but fine. Yet when he turned to leave, he swore he saw her in the corner of the room, half hidden in shadow, watching, smiling. When he blinked, she was gone. The house breathes. The next morning, James woke to find Henry weaker than before. His skin gray, his breath shallow. James stormed to confront Clara, but she was already on the porch, fingers tapping the rail, smiling at the swamp. "You've done something to him," James accused. She tilted her head slightly as though considering the idea. Then she smiled wider. The cicadas screamed louder than ever. And in that moment, James swore the house itself exhaled, a long, slow breath that rattled the shutters. That night, James woke to a sound. Not cicadas, not Henry's cough. A soft, steady tapping, coming from inside his own skull. When he staggered from bed, clutching his temples, he saw her standing at the end of the hall, smiling, and in her hand, glinting faintly in the lamplight, was something James had not seen before. A small glass vial. The cracks in the glass. The vial. James froze in the hallway, the lamplight burning weak and yellow behind him. Clara stood impossibly still, her hand curled delicately around the vial. The liquid inside shimmered faintly. Not water, not whiskey. Something thicker, darker. "What is that?" James demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. Clara tilted her head, the smile never faltering. She raised the vial as if offering a toast, then slipped it into the pocket of her apron. And without a word, she turned and vanished down the stairwell. James followed. but by the time he reached the kitchen, she was gone. The stove was cold. The room empty. The only sound was the slow drip of rain through the roof into a bucket on the floor. A brother's suspicion by morning, James was certain. Clara was no simple servant. He confronted Henry, shaking him awake. "She's poisoning you," James said. "I saw it. A vial hidden away like a thief. You have to get rid of her." Henry's eyes, clouded with fever, rolled toward the shuttered window. "I've told you. She's been doing it for months. Drop by drop, but—" He coughed violently into the bedsheets. "No one believes me." James straightened. "I believe you now." But even as he said it, the words tasted uncertain, because somewhere in the back of his mind he could still see Clara's smile, patient and knowing, as though she'd been waiting for him to say exactly that. The doctor returns. James rode into town at once, demanding Dr. Fielding return. When the doctor arrived, Clara was the one to open the door again. This time she did not step aside immediately. She lingered in the frame, smiling, until James barked at her to move. The doctor examined Henry again, frowning at his decline. "He's dying, yes, but not from poison. His liver's gone. His blood's weak. I told you, this is whiskey, not witchcraft." James slammed the vial down on the table. He had found it, tucked into the cupboard behind the kitchen stove. Fielding uncorked it, sniffed, and laughed. "It's tincture of laudanum, medicine, common as cough syrup. Used to calm nerves." James stared, stunned. "Why would she hide it?" The doctor shrugged. "Because you seem the sort to break what you don't understand." When James turned to glare at Clara, she only smiled. Whispers in the dark that night. James couldn't sleep. The storm rattled the shutters, and every gust of wind carried whispers through the cracks. He sat upright in bed, listening. The whispers weren't wind. They were voices, low, overlapping, dozens of them, all speaking his name. James stumbled into the hall, pistol drawn. The voices grew louder, echoing in the walls, as though the house itself were calling him. At the far end of the hall, he saw a faint glow under Clara's door. He kicked it open. The room was empty, the bed neatly made, the lamp cold, but on the floorboards, etched deep with something sharp, were words that made his blood run cold. "She killed her master slowly with a smile." The portrait. The next morning, James searched the house. Every cupboard, every drawer, every locked chest. Clara moved about silently, watching, never interfering, always smiling. In the parlor, behind a row of old drapes, he found a painting. A portrait of Henry's late wife, pale and sorrowful, eyes that seemed to follow you across the room. But someone had scratched a faint smile into her lips. The mark was fresh. When James confronted Clara, holding the ruined portrait in front of her, she only tilted her head and whispered, the first words he'd ever heard her say. "Doesn't it suit her?" Her voice was soft, gentle, almost tender. Then silence again. The smile returned. The sheriff's warning. James rode to town once more, this time to the sheriff. "She's dangerous," James insisted. "She's mocking us, tormenting Henry, driving him into the grave. That woman isn't what she seems." The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "And yet every time I come out there, she opens the door polite as you please, shows me nothing, says nothing. If there's crime in that house, you'd best prove it." James leaned forward. "You're afraid of her, aren't you?" The sheriff didn't answer, but his silence said enough. Henry's confession back at the house. James found Henry delirious, half-collapsed on the bed. "She's not killing me," Henry whispered. His lips cracked as he spoke. "She's waiting for me to finish killing myself." James frowned. "What are you saying?" Henry's eyes rolled toward the ceiling. "It isn't the whiskey. It's her smile. Every night I see it. Every morning I wake to it. She doesn't need poison. She just needs time." James shuddered. "That's madness," Henry coughed, blood flecking his lips. "No, it's the cruelest revenge. The game of time. The days blurred." Clara's silence grew louder than words. Every time James looked for evidence, it slipped through his hands. The food was clean, the whiskey untainted, the medicine harmless, and yet Henry withered faster each day. James began to question himself. The whispers in the walls, the shadows moving just out of sight, Clara's smile waiting for him at every turn. Was she truly poisoning them, or were they poisoning themselves with fear? The house itself seemed to lean in, listening. The midnight revelation one night. Unable to bear the silence, James crept back into Clara's room. He searched every corner, every drawer, and beneath her bed he found a box. Inside were scraps of paper. Henry's letter begging for help, returned unopened. A cracked locket that had once belonged to Henry's wife, and pages torn from a diary, the ink smudged but legible. The words made James's blood run cold. I will kill him slowly, not with poison, not with blade, but with patience. With a smile, he staggered back, clutching the box, and that's when he realized Clara was standing in the doorway. She didn't speak. She didn't lunge, she only smiled, and in her hand was not a vial this time, but Henry's pistol. She raised it slowly, the smile never faltering, the barrel aimed steady at James's chest. The cicadas outside screamed like 1,000 knives. The trigger clicked. The house devours the gunshot that wasn't. The click rang louder than thunder. James braced for pain, for the tearing of flesh and bone, but nothing came. Clara's smile widened as she lowered the pistol. She opened her hand. The cylinder was empty. She let the gun clatter to the floorboards, the hollow sound echoing through the hall. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away, her bare feet silent against the wood. James sank against the wall, his breath ragged, sweat slicking his temples. It wasn't mercy, it was worse than that. Henry's collapse. When James stumbled into Henry's room, the bed was empty. The sheets soaked through with sweat. A trail of smeared blood led down the corridor. He found Henry in the parlor, collapsed before the cold fireplace, his face the color of ash. Help me, Henry rasped, clutching James's arm. She's winning. James tried to lift him, but Henry was too heavy, his body limp and shaking. Clara entered quietly, carrying a basin of water. She set it beside Henry without a word, then placed a damp cloth against his forehead. James wanted to strike her, to rip that smile off her face. But Henry clutched tighter. Don't, Henry whispered. That's what she wants. The storm that night, the swamp erupted in storm. Rain hammered the roof, thunder rattled the shutters. Wind howled through cracks in the boards. The house groaned with every gust, as if the storm were trying to tear it from the earth. James paced the upstairs hall with the pistol, now loaded, each bullet checked by his trembling hands. Clara moved through the house like a shadow, calm, untouched by the storm. Once James thought he saw her reflection in the cracked parlor mirror, smiling from behind his shoulder. But when he turned, the room was empty. The storm raged. The house breathed. The smile endured. The sheriff's silence. The next morning, James rode into town through the mud. He demanded the sheriff ride out with him, bring deputies, drag Clara away if necessary. The sheriff listened in silence, then leaned across his desk. You don't understand, he said softly. That house has always been like this, ever since Henry's wife died. Folks don't go there for a reason. James slammed his fist on the desk. You're the law. Do your damn job. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Some things can't be arrested. When James rode back alone, the swamp seemed thicker, darker, as though it were swallowing the path behind him. The house turns back inside. James noticed things missing. His pocket watch, a letter from his saddlebag, a silver flask. When he demanded Clara return them, she only tilted her head, smiling as though he'd misplaced them himself. That night, he heard the ticking of his watch in the walls, the faint drip of his flask spilling onto the floorboards, the rip of paper as his letter tore itself in two. The house wasn't haunted, it was hungry, and Clara was feeding it. Henry's warning. Henry grew weaker by the hour. His lips cracked, his voice barely a rasp. She doesn't need to kill you, he whispered to James. She just has to wait. The house does the rest. James shivered. You mean she's haunting us with tricks, with whispers, with... Henry's eyes rolled, fever bright. No, she's patient. That's the cruelty. She'll let you destroy yourself, and when you finally break, she'll still be smiling. The night hunt, James decided to end it. He waited until midnight when the storm returned. He crept through the halls with the pistol in hand, searching for Clara. Every door he opened revealed nothing but shadows. Every corner he turned led back into the same corridor. The house seemed to bend, to loop, to rearrange itself. At last he found himself in the dining room. The table was set for three plates, 3 glasses of whiskey, 3 chairs, and Clara seated at the head, smiling. The other 2 chairs were empty, but the plates steamed as though food had just been served. The mock feast. James raised the pistol, finger tightening on the trigger. "Enough," he hissed. "Tell me what you've done to him. Tell me what you're doing to this house." Clara did not answer. She lifted her glass, gestured to the chair opposite her, and smiled wider. For a moment, James thought he smelled something sweet. Not poison, not rot, but something cloying like sugar boiled too long. It filled his nostrils, thick and suffocating. Then Henry stumbled into the room, pale as a corpse, his eyes wild. "Don't sit down," Henry croaked. "That's how she wins." The breaking point, James backed away, the pistol shaking. The walls pulsed with the sound of cicadas. Louder, closer, as though the insects were inside the plaster. The chandelier swayed, though there was no wind. The shadows lengthened across the walls, stretching into smiles of their own. Clara stood slowly, the smile never faltering. She walked toward James, one step at a time. The pistol rose. James's hand trembled. "Stop smiling," he roared. But she didn't. And when she stopped just inches away, her breath warm on his face, he realized the truth. The smile was not on her lips, it was in her eyes. The pistol fired. The shot tore through the room, the sound cracking the chandelier chain. Glass rained down like falling stars. When the smoke cleared, Clara was gone, but the bullet hole wasn't in the wall. It was in Henry's chest, and he was smiling. The irreversible act, the blood, that smiled. James dropped the pistol, his ears ringing, the smoke curling toward the rafters. Henry lay on the floor, a dark bloom spreading across his chest. His lips parted, gasping for air, but twisted upward in a grotesque smile. "No," James whispered, stumbling forward. I wasn't aiming at you." Henry coughed, blood flecking his teeth. His hand clutched James's sleeve, pulling him close. His voice was a rasp, thick with wetness. "She made you do it," Henry whispered. "That's her way." And then his body went slack. The smile never left his face. Clara's silence. James whirled, searching the room. Clara was gone. No sound of footsteps, no closing door, no whisper of fabric. The chandelier swayed gently. Above, its broken crystals scattering shards of light across the table, the feast Clara had set still steamed, untouched. James's chest heaved. His brother's corpse lay at his feet. The storm outside battered the shutters like fists. And somewhere in the house, Clara was smiling. The panicked James staggered through, the halls calling for her, shouting curses that dissolved into broken cries. The house answered with groans and sighs, every board flexing beneath his boots as if the house itself were breathing faster now, feeding on his fear. He tore open every door. Henry's study, Clara's room, the locked closets, all empty. But in each room something waited for him. In Henry's study, the pistol's spent casing rested neatly on the desk. In Clara's room, the box of letters and tokens was gone. In the parlor, Henry's portrait now wore the same carved smile as his corpse. The house wasn't haunted. It was curated by her. The trap of the swamp James fled outside into the storm, desperate to escape. But the swamp path had vanished. The rain turned the earth to mire, and every tree looked the same in the shifting mist. The gate that should have led back to town was gone, swallowed by vines. The swamp gurgled and shifted beneath him, sucking at his boots. The cicadas shrieked from every branch, their chorus so loud it drowned his thoughts. And through the mist, he thought he saw her, standing still, watching, smiling. When he staggered forward, she dissolved into the fog. Returned to the house exhausted, soaked, shaking, James stumbled back to the porch. The door swung open before he touched it, creaking wide as if the house were inviting him back. He stepped inside. Henry's body was gone. Only a smear of blood remained, leading back up the stairs. The chase James followed, half mad, clutching the pistol, though it held no bullets. The trail led him through the upstairs corridor, past the rooms where shadows seemed to lean closer, their shapes bending into grins. At the end of the hall, he saw Clara. She stood at the threshold of the master bedroom, her hands folded, her smile soft, almost gentle. "Why?" James croaked. Why him? Why me? Her head tilted slightly. She opened her mouth, and for the first time he heard her laugh. It was quiet, musical, terrifying. Then she stepped backward into the dark room. James followed. The bedroom of the dead. The master bedroom reeked of mold and iron. The shutters were nailed shut, the air thick with dust. On the bed lay Henry's body, arranged carefully, his hands folded over his chest. His face still smiled. At the foot of the bed, a second shape lay under a sheet. Smaller, feminine. James pulled the sheet back. It was Henry's wife, or what was left of her, skin pulled tight, lips curled upward in a faint, carved grin. Preserved. Displayed. James staggered back, choking. Clara's voice whispered in the dark. They all smile in the end. The breaking mind. James pressed his hands to his ears, shaking his head. You're insane, he muttered. You've lost your mind. But even as he said it, he realized his hands were trembling, his vision swimming. The house tilted around him, the walls warping inward. The smiles weren't just on the portraits or corpses anymore. They were in the cracks of the plaster, the pattern of the floorboards, the curve of every shadow. And Clara stood in the center of it all, perfectly still, perfectly calm. Smiling. The irreversible act. James raised the pistol. Empty. He knew it. But rage blinded him. He swung the weapon like a club, charging at her. Clara did not move. The storm howled. The chandelier swayed. The house groaned, and as James brought the pistol down, the floor gave way beneath his feet. He plunged into darkness. James landed hard, the air knocked from his lungs. When he opened his eyes, he was in the cellar. A place he hadn't known existed. Dozens of chairs lined the room, each holding a figure. Figures that smiled. Some were skeletons, their jaws frozen in grins. Others were more recent, townsfolk perhaps, their flesh gray but their lips twisted upward. Every one of them smiled at him through the dark. And Clara's voice whispered behind him, "Now it's your turn." The final smile, the cellar of smiles. James turned slowly. His heart battered his ribs like a trapped bird. Clara stood at the bottom of the steps, her lantern throwing shadows across the cellar. The light revealed row after row of chairs, each occupied by the dead. They weren't just strangers. James's stomach twisted as he recognized faces. The old sheriff before him, the doctor who had insisted nothing was wrong, neighbors he'd seen in Redfern years ago, all seated. All still, all smiling. The air was heavy with mildew and the sickly sweet scent of rot. The lantern flame quivered as if even the light itself wanted to flee. Clara stepped closer. The smile fixed to her face, her shadow lengthening across the corpses. "You see?" she whispered, her voice smooth as silk. "It isn't poison that kills them. It's time." The truth uncoils. James backed against the wall, his breath ragged. You did this?" Clara tilted her head. "I waited. That's all." Her eyes gleamed in the lantern light. "They destroy themselves. With greed. With guilt. With drink. With lies. All I do is smile. And they can't stand it. They crumble piece by piece until there's nothing left but this." She gestured to the rows of corpses, their grins frozen in rictus. James shook his head violently. "No, you're lying. You poisoned Henry. You made me." Her smile deepened. "I didn't touch him." "You did." The words echoed through the cellar like stones dropped into a well. The family cursed. James's chest tightened. Why us?" Clara set the lantern on a chair, the light haloing her pale face. For the first time she spoke Henry's name. "Your brother inherited more than land. He inherited cruelty from your father, and his father before him. This house remembers. I only returned it to you," James staggered. "Returned what?" "The curse," she whispered. "The Wilcox name is nothing but decay wrapped in money and whiskey. I am not your servant. I am the debt collector." The cellar groaned as though the house itself agreed. The smile spreads. James dropped to his knees, clutching his head. He wanted to scream, to deny her words, but his lips trembled, and he felt them curl upward. A smile. Unwilled. Impossible to stop. No. he gasped, his jaw aching as the grin widened. No! The corpses seemed to lean toward him, their grins glowing in the lantern light. The sound of cicadas roared in his ears, deafening, until it was no longer outside but inside him. 1,000 screaming mouths buzzing in his skull. Clara crouched before him, her face inches from his. Don't fight it, she murmured. The smile is the last truth. The final twist James's body shook. His eyes filled with tears as his grin split his lips raw. In the blur of lantern light and corpse smiles, he finally saw what Clara truly was. Not a woman, not a servant. Something older. Something born of the swamp and the house, wearing a woman's shape like a mask. A patient parasite, feeding not on flesh but on guilt, on fear, on decay. Every Wilcox had fed her with their sins. Every neighbor who looked away had joined her cellar of smiles. Now it was his turn. The last chair James felt himself dragged, not by her hands, but by the weight of inevitability. His body moved without his will, his feet shuffling across the dirt floor. One chair waited for him, empty, the wood polished by use. He sat, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his lips curled into the endless smile. Clara lifted the lantern higher, her teeth gleaming in the glow. Now the house will wait again, she whispered, until the next master comes. The storm above quieted. The cicadas fell silent. The house sighed, its hunger sated for now. In the cellar, rows of smiles gleamed faintly in the lantern light. Clara extinguished the flame, plunging the chamber into darkness, and in that dark, the smiles remained, always smiling, always waiting.